Welcome to episode 17 of the Empowering Ability Podcast.
Welcome to the Empowering Ability Podcast, where we get you and your loved ones impacted by disability the information needed to live a full and meaningful life. Now here's your host, Eric Gall.
Welcome to the Empowering Ability Podcast. This is your host, Eric Gall. And for all of our listeners, I just want to remind you that we are currently still recording our mini-series on housing for people with a disability. And if that's a topic that interests you, make sure to go over to empoweringability.org and grab the free download on creating your home. It's a great workbook that'll help you start to think about what your vision is for home and how to start to implement that and start the conversation. So go on over to empoweringability.org and grab that for you and your family. So today's episode is a bonus to the mini-series on housing for people with a disability. And today's episode is part of the recording from episode 1, which was not released, with Keenan Wellar of Live, Work, Play. Keenan is a co-founder, co-leader, and the director of marketing and communications for Live, Work, Play. And in episode 1, I asked Keenan, what's the question that you get asked most by families? And Keenan's answer was all around housing. Families are asking, what do we do about housing? And Keenan gives us his answer to the housing question, and I love Keenan's approach. He takes really a coach approach with families when answering this question, and I agree with him that that's the best way that anybody can serve a family when asked that question, or really most of the questions that the families ask. So I really think you're going to enjoy Keenan's take on housing, and also Keenan shares really the approach that's worked for him and worked for Live, Work, Play. So I think you're going to enjoy that. Take a listen. Keenan, what's the most common question in your role as a co-leader at Live, Work, Play? What's a question that you're getting asked all the time by families?
What should we do? Yeah, just yesterday, actually, I get asked a lot about housing, just as a broad, label. People just kind of, what should we do in housing? And I've kind of altered my responses or conversation a lot over the years, and tend to respond to that by asking a lot of questions, because I think it's important that people find their own answer. There's a lot of risk to all concerned if I just try to provide the answer, which is also disrespectful, because I probably, unless I've known the people for a long, long time, that would be different. But someone who's just kind of asking me, I should not be trying to answer that question based on a little bit of information over the phone. So it's really reflecting back and asking questions. And where I would try to lead people in their inquiries is, well, let's start with where do most citizens tend to live? What type of living situations are most frequently observed in the community? And then let's start with those, and let's just consider what are the barriers to those outcomes, and approach it that way. I think it's less productive, or certainly shuts down, closes a lot of doors or windows and opportunities if it just starts with kind of what's the systemic one-size-fits-all perfect housing solution, and really saying, well, it's really about your son or daughter. What are they like? How much do they value privacy? How much do you even know about that? Have they had many experiences outside of the family home? So, on what basis would we make these sorts of decisions that we're announcing, I think they'd like to have a roommate? Well, how do we know this? Most people don't. Over time, most people do not. They would value their privacy. Not saying that, a group of people choosing to live together, that it's wrong or that you shouldn't, but it's more about how do we know that that's an informed choice, and how we considered, what that means in terms of loss of privacy and how we're going to manage that household. And so really, I think to cut to the chase, with a lot of people, I would say, well, have you considered an apartment? And they're like, an apartment. I'm like, yeah, you move out of your parents' house and you rent an apartment. Kind of
Yeah.
a normal life journey. And then really, let's just knuckle down. What are the barriers to that? And, a lot of it is safety concerns. And so, if someone was working with us on that process, if they identified with us, this is, we're really confident, this is what Joe wants, and these are the barriers we see, and can you help us work through those? And that is, some really exciting work that we do, and just tackling one by one. I think that's what we would suggest, is look at it as a journey, and what are some of the steps along the way, and it's okay to go out of sequence, and also maybe letting go of some things that a family may have decided are important, and as a kind of outside observer, and you're thinking, well, is that important? Does someone have to, for example, be able to use a stove? Should we say, if you can't use a stove, you shouldn't live in your own apartment? Because I will hear these types of things from time to time. Well, once he learns to use a stove, then it's okay. And then I'm saying, well, what if it never happens? What if that's just not a good tool for that person for various reasons? Does it, are there not people in the world who don't use a stove, and yet they don't live in a group home? Well, yeah, I guess there are. I'm like, okay, so maybe that's not the way to go about it, listing all the things a person can't do as reasons why a certain, living situation is not possible. So we've had all kinds of interesting things, someone that had a challenge with shaving. We've had appliance troubles, and we've learned all kinds of interesting things about technology and tools. And, there are dishwashers and microwaves, and, there are iPads and technologies with reminders and ways of people getting in touch when there's a problem. And so I think as we as an agency have worked on being less obtrusive in people's lives, how can we get ourselves more and more in the background so they can thrive and grow, and also not be stigmatized by having us hanging around? Kind of the same thing translates for families. So how can we support a person to move forward in their lives? And what are ways that, as a loving family, to really have that be the role? The role is to be a loving family, and to be less of kind of an obtrusive monitor and worrier, and almost like an extension of agency, of kind of looking at your own family member as someone that you're working on. And how can we get out of that role and be more in a traditional role of a loving, caring family member? And also, really, we haven't talked at all about just developing unpaid relationships in people's lives, which is a huge focus, and was a huge aha moment for us with a person like an Al Condalusi. And let's identify some of the real issues around people being isolated and loneliness. And these are not things you fix with programs. These are things that can only be changed through authentic relationships. And so how do we, connect people and bring other people into their lives? And I think that's a big part of that, whether it's housing or anything else, is let's not reduce the conversation to what is the family and the agency going to do. Let's really take a broader look at what other people are already in the picture who might have a role, but also who else could be brought into this picture. And let's reduce, the role or the critical importance of family members and agency, and let's increase the number of relationships in this person's life, because family members are not forever, and you also don't want unhealthy dependencies on paid supports. So the more unpaid people you have in your life, then the less of a shock to the whole system of life for individuals. And I think that's a big eye-opener as well for families, is realizing that often if we, as a family or an agency, if we kind of take on or take over, no matter how well-intentioned, items in a person's life, then that's really just closing a door to other people being involved. So again, always trying to have that objective oversight of, is this is this a role someone else could be filling? And, as a staff person or as a family member, maybe right now it needs to be me because there isn't anyone else. And, I think that's where I would like to see families able to move, is that, be there to step in when you're needed, like you would with any family member. But, try not to end up as a social worker or a developmental services worker. Be a family member.
Right.
And, what are the barriers to that? And, without suggesting to people that there isn't very good reason why they've ended up in that role, because they've been on waiting lists. They've had bad service experiences. They've had to step in and go above and beyond a typical parent-child relationship, and they've been doing that in many cases for decades. And then here's Keenan going, "Well, you should really stop doing that." Well,
yeah, I can resonate with that because it's from my own family experience with my mom, right? One of the things we were talking about was being her role has been more of a caregiver than a parent, and I hear that a lot from families. So it really connects with what you're saying.
I hope you enjoyed that short clip from the recording in episode 1 with Keenan Wellar. I love a couple of questions that he asked families. So he asked them to think about what people typically do when moving out on their own from their parents' place, for the first time, and what does that look like? Just helps to shift the context a little bit and gets people to start to think a little bit differently. And also asking, those barriers that we can start to come up with, like, for example, my son or daughter can't use the stove. Thinking about, is that actually a barrier? Are there people that are living without stoves currently, or knowing how to use the stove currently? So I love those two questions. Great questions to think about. Also great how Keenan brings up the importance of relationships. And I encourage you to check out episode 6, where Keenan, Al Condalusi, and I have a great conversation about relationships and building social capital in your life. And if housing is something that you're working on, feel free to go to the website and get the free download on creating your home. So there's this great workbook that's going to help guide you through creating your vision and starting to implement your vision for what your home looks like. So go on over to the website. It's empoweringability.org. And I think you'll get a lot of value out of that. I'd like to thank all of our listeners that have left us a review on iTunes. Your reviews help me understand what I'm doing well, what I can improve on the podcast, what you want to hear. So it's great feedback that you're providing, so please continue to do so. Also, by leaving a 5-star review, it helps other people find the podcast. So thanks so much for those reviews, and keep them coming. Next week's guest on the podcast is Al Atmansky. Al is one of the founders or co-founders of Plan, the Plan Lifetime Advocacy Network in BC. It has affiliate networks across the country, P4P in Toronto being one of those. Al, as well, was instrumental in creating and launching the RDSP across Canada, a super innovative, one-of-a-kind financial savings plan for people with a disability. And Al is also an Ashoka Fellow. And on the podcast, Al and I talk about basic income and providing income for universal income for people. And we also talk about thinking like a movement, so how to spread social causes and to think really like a movement to have the impact that we want to that you want to have. So Al's also an author, so we'll chat a little bit about one of his most recent books, Impact, and I really think you're going to enjoy that episode. So looking forward to connecting with you next week, and thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast. Visit us at empoweringability.org for more podcasts and resources to help you and your loved ones impacted by disability build a full and meaningful life.